The next guest on my podcast is Justin Geldof from Newton. Newton are a management consultancy firm, a long-standing client, or I'd really say partner of Ghyston's. We work together on lots of different projects over the years and have achieved loads of great things. Hopefully this podcast will give you some insight into how to work together effectively and how to make good change within your organisation. So listen in and please let me know what you think. So Justin, thanks very much for coming and joining us. Really good to have you on the podcast. Do you want to start off by just sort of telling the audience a little bit about you and Newton and kind of how you personally and Newton as an organisation have kind of got to where they are, sort of synopsis of the story?
Yeah, of course. So, hi everyone, thank you. My name's Justin, Justin Geldof, no relation to Bob. I'm sure that's the first thing that will pop into your mind as you're listening to this. And I've been with Newton now for 12 years. Actually, yesterday was my 12th anniversary at Newton.
Which is,
thank you, much longer than I was actually expecting to be there for.
And that is coincidentally as long as Ghyston's been around.
Oh, that's
so
amazing.
Yeah, we had our 12th anniversary just a couple of months ago. So
that's incredible.
We're in sync.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. So I've done so many roles since I joined Newton. I joined as a web developer. Nowhere near as good as any of the Ghyston developers. I put that out there now. My career was not that illustrious. But I joined as a web developer. We were building small little web products as part of our work. And after a couple of years, realized it's probably not the right thing for Newton to be doing. And it happened to coincide with an email from yourself, actually, introducing what was software at the time, now Ghyston, and services. And I picked up the phone and we had a really, really great meeting. Which was sort of, long story short, we've been working together ever since. Probably the last 8 or 9 years would be my guess.
That sounds about right. Yeah, it has been a while.
And then since then, I have sort of had more of a role in building what we're calling our digital practice, and that's focused on how do we use data and client data to solve problems and then embed those problems into sort of ongoing sustainable solutions. There, so it was sort of the first point before we sort of wrap some software and everything around it. And then about 2 years ago, I moved from being client-facing and solving problems for clients to probably the hardest challenge of my career is how do you change Newton? We are probably the most difficult customer for ourselves, that's for sure. So I now look after all our technology and the use of our technology right across the business there.
Great. Thank you. That's really good summary. And Newton might be a difficult customer for you, but actually it's a fantastic customer for us. We often, we always try and present ourselves with the people we're working with as a partnership, but probably our relationship with Newton has got more of that like ring to it than any of our others. Because we really have taken quite a strong partnership approach to loads and loads of the projects we're doing. Often we're sort of going side by side and Newton are doing the sort of management consultancy, efficiency type work, and we're doing the sort of tech work that sits alongside that and backs it up. And kind of feels like we're presenting ourselves as kind of two for the price of one, a force of two great teams. What do you think is the key to that success? Why has it been so good? And what can other people do to try and achieve like that level of really good partnership?
Yeah, I think I'll start with one of the really important parts of the work that we do at Newton. It was one of the key elements that our founders brought in right from the very beginning, that we provide a guarantee for our work. So if we don't deliver the savings that the client is expecting us to deliver, we don't get paid for our work. And 95% of the stuff that we do is covered by that kind of commercial relationship. So it's really important when we're working with a partner that sort of shared responsibility for delivering an outcome for the client is felt. And that's been part of our relationship with Ghyston since day one. We're working together to solve that particular problem for the client, and that particular problem will result in something happening. So that might be being able to deliver a service so much better, it might be saving money, it might be increasing sales, it could be all three of those in conjunction. But sort of feeling like we're in it together, we don't leave until that's done, has been sort of one of the key parts of the relationship that we've had with Ghyston.
Yeah, and it's interesting having that outcome-focused attitude. I think is so useful regardless of what you're doing. Really, it's very easy to get distracted by the day-to-day of like the specific thing you're doing and thinking that that's the output. But like it might be the output, but it's not the outcome. And actually staying focused on that outcome and feeling like everyone's always pointing at that and saying this is why we're doing it is so vitally important.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that we do isn't sort of the most important thing. It's the impact that it has on the client and the people that we're working closely with in the client that matters.
Yeah, and there's been several like different environments and areas that we've been working in, from big engineering builds that are quite physically based in difficult places through to some like IoT kind of stuff and lots of very data-centric, sort of heavy lifting data projects that we've done as well. So it's been really, really broad. Could you kind of pitch a unifying theme about it all?
Oh, that's a big challenge. I like that challenge. I think the unifying theme has been like starting with the problem that we're trying to solve and making sure that's a problem that fits who Newton are and who Ghyston are there. So we're not about going and creating a competitor for SAP or something like that. Sort of those big kind of things aren't where we operate because we can't provide that direct link to value in our minds. So it's finding that problem that we know we are uniquely placed to solve. And that we know the skills and the experience and the capability that Ghyston brings will really help us to solve it and solve it in a sustainable way as well. One of the things that we try and do is engineer ourselves out of a client by making sure that problem is fixed. Now it's fixed for the next 5 years, the next 10 years there.
Yeah, and yeah, some of the software we've built is very self-sustaining, light touch support for a long period of time afterwards. So when you go into an organisation, there's a million things that you can do. There's like you'll walk in to lots of organisations and immediately see so many different opportunities to do things. How do you work out as an organisation what the right things to do are?
Yeah, again, a really great question. We call it an assessment. Other people might call it a diagnostic, and that's let's just understand what's going on. And we do that through quite a few ways. Observation, we'll just sort of walk around, have a chat to people. If we're looking at a production line, we'll just sort of stand there for 4 or 5 hours and actually see what happens. If we're working with social carers, we'll sit in the car with them and follow them around and work with them for a couple of days just to understand how they work there. So sort of observation is a key part. And then the next is data. So understand using historical data. Sometimes that data is really high quality and really good. Sometimes it is a bit of a mess. So we need to then also understand how to make sense of it. But using that data there to say, is what we're observing something that's just happening now? Is it something that's been happening for a long time? And sort of trying to sort of make sense of that. Out of all of that, we can start to put I'll say a price, a cost, or on the value of solving it. So if we solve a problem that we're observing and that's backed up by data, what does that mean for the client? And does it mean that they can go and see more people in the community because each visit takes less time because they're spending less time traveling, for example? Or does it mean actually it's going to cost them less to buy this particular product, so it's got a financial benefit? Does it mean a mixture of the both? And then with that valuation, we can prioritize. So one might be just sorting out what's the most valuable thing to solve, starting there and working down. We call that the Pareto approach. The other one might be actually, let's put a priority. What is the most important thing that business is trying to fix? It might not be the most valuable thing. It might be sort of in the top 3 or 4, and start with that as well.
I suppose sometimes it might be something that's blocking other improvements as well. So you kind of need to start with that. Yeah. So it's really important to Newton that you get that piece right, because you're putting these guarantees behind it, right?
That's right.
So what are the tactics to building confidence around that prediction? You talked about using experiential data and more objective data and trying to combine them together. That sounds like quite an important tactic.
Yeah, absolutely. That is probably our primary tactic there. We do this over quite a long period of time. So this isn't working with a client for a day or 2 days or even a week. Our assessments can take up to 3 months because it's important that we sort of deeply understand the business and the different areas that they operate in and the impact of sort of different days and weeks on their operations as well. There. We also bring in sort of general market data, general market trends, publicly available data when we're working with sort of clients in local government and health to sort of understand how that's all working. Benchmarking data is always really useful as well. Yeah.
It must be quite a leap of faith to make those investments into those observations because you're getting like really highly paid, well-qualified people to stack shelves or like just watch people work for quite long periods of time.
Yeah, and again, it's one of the founding principles of Newton that we want to feel what the client is feeling and what the people we're working closely are feeling, and that not only helps us understand how they work, but it sort of builds a really good relationship, which is the foundation for sort of I understand how you're operating. Now I can help you change how you're operating so you can operate in a better way, better for you, better for your employer, better for sort of your clients and customers there as well.
So you've got these tactics of seeing where generally do you think the biggest gains tend to be? Like if you package them up into like problems that organisations have, are there kind of key buckets where the improvements tend to be?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the problems tend to be at the boundaries between the silos in organisations. So is sort of responsibility for something happening moves from one department or one area to another. That's where we tend to see most of the problems occurring there. And sort of the solutions are how do you remove any friction, streamline, maybe even reorganise how things are working to remove those. In the cases of things like where we're working with social workers, it's what is stopping them from doing the job, the thing that they want to be doing, which is being with people and helping them. And that's things like no one wants paperwork, travel, stuck in traffic, going between various visits in the community and things like that. So how do we sort of shape their day so people can spend the most time with the most vulnerable people in the community, really helping them rather than filling out a form for a government report.
Yeah, and I've noticed that as a theme with all the health and care kind of work that we've done sort of with other people as well as with Newton is kind of a lot of it's removing the dross, yes. Right? It's the painful, boring, mundane stuff that people didn't sign up to. Yeah. They just want to get on with their job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and it's the thing that frustrates people the most. Yeah. And quite often it's we'll go into a work with a client and they'll know what the problem is, and they'll know they'll have ideas on the solution. And the problem, it can be technically difficult to solve, and that's where we have really great partners like Ghyston. We work together on that. But sort of, in my experience, the more challenging thing is the whole change management. Like, how do you actually work with people to change, convince people that this is the right thing, support them through that change process, because change is really difficult, particularly if you've been working in the same way for the last 15, 20 years. And you've got a young consultant saying maybe you could be working better as well. So sort of trying to solve all of those problems and probably more people problems and technical problems is sort of the bigger challenge on our work.
Yeah, I often say kind of the two biggest ways to get software wrong is either A, to build something that people don't need, yes. So that's kind of not getting that business case right in the first place, or B, like failing the user adoption piece, so it's not carrying the users with you, and sort of making sure that they feel bought into it, or they see the point in doing it right and using the software well. Yeah.
And I would say that's where we've learned a lot from Ghyston. And sort of the team here, which is it's been how do we bring the user to everything that we're doing and design something that works for them, and we'll design something that will work for them when we're not there as well. It's really important to get that right.
Yeah, and the agile approach sort of naturally feeds into that, doesn't it? By doing it bit by bit, showing people like lots of demos, lots of feedback, and then you can adjust and work with it. So yeah, all the standard agile arguments. So we're solving problems that people making a big difference to what people are doing. What are the key kind of technological fields that you think are starting to come into this? I'm thinking, like, is it right for every organisation to be thinking about machine learning and like real, like serious use of my data, or should people be thinking of starting somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a podcast without mentioning AI, can you?
Yeah.
I think you were quite careful not to mention it there, but I'm not sure people would listen.
Kept it as ML this time. Yeah.
It largely depends on the context of the client organisation that we're working with. I think everyone will be acutely aware, right through local government, for example, there's been a real lack of investment in digital and technology and sort of the application of that in their work. And like, I get it, because it's really tough to operate in that environment and budgets are really tight and there's huge demands from the community. So it's sort of in that kind of environment, the solutions are quite different and the application technology is quite different compared to a retailer that actually probably does have the money to invest in the latest whiz-bang things to sort of put cameras above aisles and see where people are congregating and then sort of space out where their products are to smooth the flow through stores. So I think it depends on the client context, but some things that I'm really excited by is reablement tech. So reablement is a really important thing where if someone in the community has some kind of episode, so it might be a fall or some kind of accident where they need some kind of treatment, the best thing for them, if it's the right thing for them, is for them to be reabled in their own home so they can continue to live an independent and healthy life. The worst thing for them, it is to put them in residential care. Like, we know that they will have a shorter, worse life if they go into residential care when they don't need it. So reablement is a really important thing there, and reablement tech is really exciting around, like, how do you understand if someone actually needs more acute support? So you can do things like put sensors on a fridge. How often do people open a fridge? Which means, are they getting up out of their chair and then going and sort of making themselves a drink or something like that? Chair sensors, are they people sitting for too long in a chair? You can use devices like the health devices on your phone, Apple Health, Google Health, that will say, oh, this person, before they had their episode, their fall, for example, was able to walk 5,000 steps a day. When they were in hospital, before they left, they're able to do 2,000. Now they're only doing 500. Perhaps you should try and do something about it there. Oh, and it also happens that there's a lovely show on in the park. So maybe you could convince someone to take them for a walk to the park. Sort of bringing all of that together. I think it's a sort of a combination of tech and then maybe some behavioral science and some interventions from social care to really sort of supercharge a reablement process, for example. I think that's really exciting, and I think that's where we'll start to see some of that go.
See, it's interesting because some of the data you talked about there is sort of data that lots of us have, like things like your step data from Apple Health, that sort of stuff, that actually a lot of us have just lying around us all the time that we just need to tap into.
Absolutely.
And other bits of the data you were talking about, like fridge sensors and opening fridges, that's something you have to quite deliberately add to the mix.
Yes.
But then the magic, I guess, all happens when you combine it all together and actually draw the insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And those things like fridge sensors and stuff like that, the cost of those is relatively small and it's going down. Mm-hmm. So it's the barriers to entry for cash-strapped local government isn't that great. I mean, it's still a challenge, of course, but it isn't as great as what it used to be.
Yeah, yeah. So where do you think we're going with the future of all this? Where's it all headed? What's where's Newton kind of particularly pushing the boundaries and trying to do more and have more impact?
Yeah, so I mean, I joked about AI earlier, but you can't really ignore it. So it's how is AI changing every single industry? And I know the government's published a report at the end of last year to say consultancy will probably be one of the biggest industries impacted, and management consultants need to understand how to bring AI to the work that they're doing for their clients. So we're sort of really, really looking at that. And we're looking at it in a few areas. So one is things like digital twins and simulation. So how can you start to predict what might happen and then test various responses to that? And that's really, we're applying in areas such as if there's a big stockpile that a business needs to maintain, and there's a lot of value in that stockpile. What would happen if you start to reduce the stockpile? Will you still be able to sort of maintain some kind of readiness to deliver and things like that? In those kind of scenarios there, what happens if you don't do maintenance on it, or what happens if you buy sort of new kit to go into that stockpile as well? So think of it like in an infrastructure environment, your stockpile could be your big trucks that you use to carry gravel around. Those trucks will need maintenance. They'll have a lifespan. You can do work on them to increase that lifespan. You'll also have some spare so that if something happens, it doesn't stop you from working. So how do you make sure you've got the minimum amount of those really expensive trucks to continue delivering the service, for example, and then start to model some scenarios, or you win some more work. So how do you get trucks sort of on the go quickly? So that kind of stuff with digital twins is really, really interesting.
Yeah. And we've been doing some exactly that together.
Yeah, absolutely. We have. Yeah, we've worked really closely on that. The second area we're looking at is it's probably something similar, and it's understanding risk and resilience across a really complex supply chain. I'll take the army, for example. They've got a really complex supply chain for some of their simple, basic things like uniforms or meals and stuff like that. And they'll have thousands of suppliers across the globe that are delivering across that supply chain. Various contracts, subcontractors, subcontractors. And so how do you start to understand actually what's the level of risk that exists? Like if you go right down to where the clothes are being made in a factory, actually, is that the only factory in the world that can make those clothes? And what would happen if that factory shuts down, for example? So sort of trying to unpick some of the complexity that sort of our just-in-time global economy is sort of built into it, and sort of use that to make better decisions.
Because the complexity in this has just like exploded over the last sort of decade or two, hasn't it? And the risk profiles of, we've seen what's happened with the Suez Canal, and like there's been various events that have really super highlighted the risk inherent in all that. Yeah. So I guess the time is now in terms of like having to take on all that complexity and do really effective what-if modelling across the board.
And sort of the tech that's coming out now in the approaches, like large language models, help you dive into contracts a lot easier. There could be thousands of these contracts that exist across the supply chain. So you can use large language models to pull out the important things within them, for example, and summarize what's going on. So the tech has made it a lot easier now.
Yeah. And even things that you might consider to be quite simple, you start scratching under the surface of these supply chains, they do just get phenomenally complex, don't they? Yeah,
absolutely. And then the third place is prediction. And again, I think we're not unique in this. And it's something that we've also worked together on. So I will get the numbers wrong, but broadly right. We spend close to £100 billion a year on treatment. When you think of the NHS and social care and things like that, we spend less than £8 billion on trying to prevent that treatment from being needed. So how do we bring in sort of predictive technologies to understand if something may happen, and then intervene to prevent that from happening? So falls is a really, really great example. There's a lot of data that exists that sort of will bring together if sort of some insight into, is someone potentially going to have a fall in their home? And if they are, how do you intervene before that fall happens, and prevent that from happening? Same with sort of social isolation and loneliness. You can start to predict if someone's likely to happen. It could be that their partner has recently passed away and they've got no family in the area. That's a pretty good indicator that someone sort of may start to become socially isolated. So how do you sort of intervene before it gets to the point where someone is too scared to leave their house and needs sort of around-the-clock care to prevent that social isolation from happening?
Yeah, and this is a huge topic. I think Peter Attia calls it medicine 2.0 versus 3.0, and argues the case for putting as much into the preventative side as to the curative side. But medicine and healthcare, mental health care in particular, with suicide being the biggest killer of men under 45. The really important fields. But it's also actually translatable to non-healthcare fields as well, isn't it? The idea of actually putting more effort into predicting and kind of anticipating what's going on, and less effort into reacting to it when it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great example that that we're seeing is retention in a lot of our big government sort of areas, like the armed forces have got a massive retention problem, and predictive analytics can help sort of start to identify those groups of people that, like, there's been a huge investment in their training and their development. How do you identify whether they might leave, and then start to intervene to sort of make it easier for them to stay?
Yeah, because I mean, I think recruitment and training costs of a developer are pretty horrendous. But, but I think for someone who flies a fighter jet or does that sort of job is even more so.
Yeah, and across most of our big industries, it is a really big problem.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Thanks very much, Justin. It's been a brilliant conversation. It's great. Thanks very much for coming and joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Rick.
Yeah, brilliant. And I look forward to lots more projects to come and more partnership work.
Amazing. Me too.